So welcome. Whoa, we've got all kinds of sounds here. Welcome to episode 5 of the actual Astronomy podcast. And don't bother editing that out. We're not that committed to quality control. So how was your week, Shane? What were we up to?
Well, it was fascinating. With COVID-19, nothing has changed. I stay in my house. I go for short walks and avoid people, and that's my life. How about you?
Yeah, more or less the same. So nothing too exciting. But I hear there's some news on your scope front.
Oh yes.
So let's.
So I officially committed to buying the Takahashi 76 DCU.
And so what? Well. Now, first off, what kind of telescope is this exactly?
So this is a small refractor. 76 millimeters is a nice form factor for travel, which is what I was all about, or my big focus. And it's also quite light. And then in addition to that, you have the Takahashi optics and high quality and all of that fantastic stuff. But it's a doublet. I don't know. I think that's probably about all.
Yeah. Is there anything kind of special about the DCU?
Oh, yes. So it breaks, well, it comes apart. The optical tube is threaded, so you can unthread that for even more portability as, say, a carry-on item on an airplane. But it also makes this a very modular / adaptable telescope. In addition to the telescope, I bought, it's called an extender. So it's kind of like a Barlow in a way, but it goes into the optical tube, and it's a 1.7 times magnifier or extender, and it turns it into, well, the stock telescope is a focal ratio of 7.5. With the extender, it goes up to an f12, which I'm just stoked for. I cannot wait to have some planetary views through that thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't get one. I had been seriously debating this as well because I own the FS60/ called the 60CB, which is a 60 millimeter f5.9 that with that extender turns into a 60Q or a 60 f10, which is a telescope which can be transformed both sort of a modest focal ratio or a pretty wide field little telescope to a relatively long focal length telescope, going from a 355 millimeter focal length to a 600 millimeter focal length. And since I had all these parts and a custom-made focuser, I thought I would get the DCU as well for the 76. You can just purchase a modular unit, or you can purchase now. The whole telescope had been on sale, but it was kind of like $50 more expensive to buy a full telescope. The modular unit wasn't on sale, so I didn't bother going with it. I've kind of gone a bit of a different direction, and anyhow, so this is a neat telescope though, because it's pretty long focal length. It can be transformed into a modest focal length for wider fields, and you can travel with it. How are you going to mount this thing, Shane? Like, every telescope needs a mount, and these telescopes that we're into buying, they don't come as whole kits. You're just basically getting a tube, right?
That's right. Yeah. So there's a couple factors here. There's the mount. Now there's the tripod that holds the mount. And then there's how do you attach the telescope to all of that stuff. So maybe I'll just start from the ground up. So that would mean the tripod that I'm using is an old Manfrotto / Bogan. Oh, gee, I forget the model number now.
It's like an 028. It's an 028, I think.
No, mine's slightly different.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay. I think mine's an 028 or something.
Yeah. So I've used that with other telescopes, and it's pretty steady. I like it a lot. I think it'll do okay. Yeah, 3046 is what I have.
3046. Okay.
Yeah. And then the mount that I have on there right now is a alt-az mount. So, an alt-az mount is probably the simplest mount you can use. It goes up and down, and it goes kind of left and right. And it's just a very intuitive way to point your telescope. So it's a Stellar View M1. I don't know the weight of it. It's a fairly small, lightweight mount.
It's like 3 or 4 pounds or something. I think you told me once.
Yeah, yeah, it's certainly heavier than your universal astronomics mount, but
Yeah.
it's still a fairly portable, easygoing mount, and can hold some decent weight.
Yeah, I've
So,
got the dwarf star, which can hold up to approximately 8 pounds.
right.
Same type of thing, Aldaz, but it only weighs 1 pound.
Yeah, that's incredible.
which
That's
is
incredible.
which is like literally it's just I had to get it because well, I know Larry, who runs Universal Astronomics, I don't think he's making as many mounts anymore. I think he still makes the dwarf star, but to buy a telescope mount that I could put in my pocket, it's just like literally you can walk around with a telescope mount in your pocket. It is that cool. And it literally is pocket size, like it fits in the pocket of my coat. um, and then I also own the Takahashi Labadis modified Teagle mount, so which is much more substantial. It's like an 8 to 10. The way I have it set up, it's about 10 pounds. So I think yours sits right in between those. So it's kind of neat that
Yeah.
we have, all this selection.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned that it may not, like, I think the 76 DCU in its kind of original or format will ride quite nicely on the mount. I'm a little concerned when I add the extender that the added length, it might present some troubles at high magnifications, but only time will tell.
Yeah, because it's like I think it's 570 millimeter focal length. I'm not sure the exact length of the telescope. And then when you put the extender in, the focal length is 954 by my recollection. But I think the tube itself is around 800. So
Yeah,
that is definitely getting up there, because that's, I think, slightly longer than my I was going to say Pentax 125, but it's a board with a Pentax lens in it that I have, which is a 5-inch apochromat. So that's a lengthy scope, but that scope only weighs like 4.5 pounds, though, this 76 DCU, that doesn't, something like that.
it's super light. Yeah, it's something around that mark. My telemeter, my Zeiss telemeter, is 840, I think 840 millimeter focal
Okay.
length.
So it should be
But
about the same length then,
yeah,
ish.
it should be around that length. Now the telemeter, you can do arm curls with that thing and get into shape. It's not a light telescope.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm interested to see how the TAC rides on there.
So
My
could you put it? Because sorry, you have the telemeter mount, don't you? You still have that?
I do. Yeah.
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 So because you have two telemeters, you're selling one or sold one, but you're keeping
Selling. Yeah.
one, and then that has like a manual EQ mount. Could you mount it on that, or would you have to get like a weird adapter plate or something?
Yeah. So Zeiss uses a very, well, it's a proprietary dovetail, and it's uh, it's thinner and not nearly as thick as, say, your traditional Vixen dovetail.
Mm-hmm.
And you well, I'll have to double check. I don't think a Vixen dovetail will slide into there. I'd have to get a Zeiss dovetail, and you can't really buy those. You just have to take one off the telemeter. And then I'm not sure if those are drilled to accept rings. I just don't think that would work.
Well, I have a suggestion for you.
Oh,
This,
well.
this podcast is now brought to you by precisionparts.com. Yeah, go to Precision Parts, and like you would have to like chat with them and maybe do some measurements. But Precision Parts, I'm sure, could make you one up. I don't think you'd get it like, I don't know how long it would take. Might take you some messing around to figure that out with them, but I'm sure you could. They've done much more complicated things down there at Precision Parts. So yeah. Sure.
Well, one other option that I'm curious to try, I'm not sure if it'll fit or not, but my Takahashi TS65, one of my vintage or classic telescopes that I have, came with an EQ mount.
Oh, okay.
And it has a clamshell basically kind of built into the mount. Like those old mounts, it was all one piece essentially.
Yeah.
And I think that 76 DCU might fit in there. The clam on the TS65 mount is a little bit smaller, but as long as the curvature is right, the clam doesn't have to close completely as long as it's secured. So I'm kind of curious to see if that'll work anyway.
So the clamshell, this is essentially the part that attaches the telescope to the mount itself. Like this is kind of where the rubber meets the road, and kind of where it sort of saddles. It's like the saddle that kind of mates the telescope and affixes it to the mount. But Like I said, personally, I haven't been as much a fan of the clamshells, and I know it's a little bit heresy to say it to some, but even the Takahashis, just because they are heavy. And then I also don't like my I have the short clamshell for my 60, and yeah, it just seems really small and heavy, and it only has one bolt, which always seems a little bit sketchy to me.
Yeah. So my plan right now, because the one thing I really don't have is a set of rings or clamshell to attach the telescope to a dovetail, which then attaches to the mount. So if this old TS65 mount won't work with the 76 DCU, then I have to make a decision of, do I buy some rings or do I buy the clamshell that TAC sells for that telescope? So I'll wait and see. I'm not going to jump on any additional purchases until I see if this thing will fit on my old mount.
Personally, my recommendation, as you know, and I made it on cloudy nights first,
Yes, thank
is
you.
is that you should get the Prima Luce Labs rings. I think that's what you should get, and get a.
Yeah, I just can't do that color, man. I know it sounds crazy because you don't look at a telescope, you look through a telescope.
It's
But
yeah.
ugh,
You're gonna be using it in the dark.
yeah, I know.
You're not gonna notice the color, and I think I like the color.
Do you? Well,
So,
you know what? Honestly, the red by itself, I don't mind. It's just the red with the white and then kind of the blue and the green that the TAC has going on it. It would just be a dog's breakfast, I think. So
I like it. Yeah, yeah.
I do
I like
like
it.
those. I think they're are they TS rings? Anyway, they're, I think APM in Europe sells them, but they're black. They're 80 millimeters. They look the part.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
TS Optics. They're CNC aluminum tube rings. Price is pretty good. They look like they're fairly robust. So if I end up going with rings, I think those are the ones I'm going to go with.
Yeah.
But
And I noticed that, and I don't know if you're familiar with this brand or not, but K Aztec, the
hmm,
perma-mounted rings, which they're actually not in production at present for the 60 and 76.
yeah,
But they're a beautiful silver ring. They're very small. Um, that's the those are the benefits. They're very small, light, high quality. The thing that I'm a little bit hesitant about those ones is that they are perma mounts. So you basically put them on, you tighten down these screws or bolts on either side, and then they're permanently affixed to your telescope. And the one thing that I like to do is loosen my rings off and slide the telescope back and forth um,
yeah.
to
To
get
achieve
balance.
balance. Yeah,
Yeah, when
yeah.
my dovetail runs out of space in the mount, so not so keen to get that. But I think as far as the aesthetics, that's the look that you're going for. So if you look up K Aztec rings, then you're gonna see the ones that those are the ones that are really gonna sing to you. But you're probably gonna have to get a pretty long dovetail plate to really make those work, I think. So yeah. So what are you
Yeah.
gonna did you figure out the focuser for it? So this telescope comes with just a 1.25-inch focuser, just like my FS60. But on my FS60, I went and pulled it off. I never used it. Again, like what I say is somewhat controversial in TAC circles. Some of the TAC parts I'm just not as much a fan of. So even before I used it, I'd only used a few TAC telescopes before, and the focuser I just didn't care for as much as the beautiful feather touch focusers. And after I bought my first feather touch about 15 years ago, I just decided I would never own another telescope that didn't have a feather touch focuser on it, for good reason. And one of them is that we observe in really cold weather sometimes. You and I have been out down to -40, and that feather touch focuser works just as good at -40 as it does at +40 or at 0 or at -20 or at +20. The thing is just unbelievable. So that's where I went with mine. Where are you going with your focuser end of the business?
Well, I've never actually used a stock Takahashi focuser before. So I am going to start there and see how I like it. To your point, I've read reviews kind of all over the spectrum, and what's becoming a common theme in our podcast here, Chris, is the sort of you got to try it for yourself, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
an eyepiece, whether it's a mount, whatever, because we all have different thresholds or expectations. And so, with that being said, I want to try that focuser for myself and just see if it meets my needs and if I think I can work with it. One thing I'll say is my fascination with these older telescopes. I'm starting to get used to using focusers that don't have all of the bells and whistles of our feather touches and the nice modern focusers that are available.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I might be able to get by with the stock one. One thing that I might miss, particularly at extremely high magnifications, would be the dual speed focuser or some kind of micro focusing sort of touch to it.
Yeah. You can buy
Um,
one. You can buy one from Takahashi.
yep.
They cost approximately $300 American.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen that. So there's that one. There's
I think it's like
the
the MEH is the product code on it.
yes.
Like
Yeah. I
I've
think
looked
you're
at it a pile of times and like, well, I think my focuser cost like, I don't know, like 500 and something American. So it's not that
yeah.
much different to swap out the entire thing for an entirely new focuser.
Yeah, and the so I have if I stick with inch and a quarter, which if I'm going to be doing any kind of high magnification observing, it's going to be with inch and a quarter um, eyepieces, or my 0.965 eyepieces adapted to inch and a quarter. So I have a Bader Zeiss T2 Prism in inch and a quarter. And the eyepiece holder on there is a helical microfocuser, which actually works fantastically. So if I use that prism slash diagonal with the stock focuser on the tack, I kind of get both worlds. I have the coarse focus of the
Yeah.
tack and then the micro focusing in the diagonal.
So that diagonal, like, and I haven't seen it yet because you just got it together here, um, relatively recently, I think.
No, I've had it actually for quite a few years now. I'd say
Okay.
probably 3 years.
So have I looked
Uh,
through that, or is it just you don't bring it out when we're doing deep space
well,
stuff?
yeah, I don't bring it to grasslands or when we're out under dark skies because when we're under the dark skies, we're typically doing a lot of lower power wide field observing. So I have the 2-inch diagonal in there, and I leave the inch and a quarter at home. Um, I really only, oops, sorry. I really only use the inch and a quarter when I'm doing kind of planetary lunar stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Huh. Yeah, I'm
But I tell
curious.
you, it's fantastic. I have had, on really good nights of seeing just in my backyard, I have had some views of Jupiter through my 120 millimeter ED Skywatcher refractor with that prism in there, and just phenomenal. Not quite photographic quality because you really don't. It's hard to achieve that visually through a telescope, but it wasn't far off. The festoons and the detail within the cloud bands, the unevenness. It was just, I didn't know that was possible through a telescope. And there was more factors than just that prism there, but it really performs well.
That's it. That's interesting. And one thing I find interesting about your comment in using it with the Skywatcher is the Skywatcher is 120 millimeter or just under. I mean, it really is a 5-inch telescope. Having had them side by side with my 125, they basically show almost identical images. But yeah, so did you find the planetary views like so much better through the prism than the other stuff, like in regular mirror diagonal?
Well, I didn't go A B, those evenings. I just, I brought the prism out and that's all I had and that's all I used. So, it's a little, there's some variables there, I guess, if, I'm going to put forward a comparison. But yeah, I would say it's better. I'm just, the colors seem more vibrant, like the great red spot to me just seems to pop more. Now, one thing I have read about prisms is they don't work on fast. Well, I shouldn't say they don't work. They work best on slower telescopes or longer focal lengths. Like I think if you're, I don't know, there's a rule out there. I don't know if it's like f8 and above you use a prism, and below you use a mirror, or 7, or it's something like that.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. So that's one of the things I was interested about when you said you were using it at f7.5. So, but I mean, there's a lot of different factors because your 7.5 might be different than someone else's 7. Like for example, If you have 7.5 on a 120, then your focal length in millimeters will actually be longer, and so a lot of the physics of the light cone will be different than, say, a telescope that's like a 60 millimeter working at f7.5, say, for example. So, and this is pretty hair splitting stuff, I think. So.
I think it is too, and from what I've read online, some people that have done A/B comparisons with that prism versus a mirror diagonal say there's no difference. They've done it back and forth many nights and cannot see any detectable difference. And I believe those reports. I think when you start talking about the differences with this high end stuff, you need one of those nights, and they don't happen very often. But a night of great seeing with excellent conditions all around. Planets high in the sky, so you avoid some of that atmospheric turbulence and distortion. Then is when you start to separate kind of the premium stuff from the good stuff, and you start to notice some of those differences.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, speaking of diagonals, unless you have anything to add on your on your new purchase.
Well, the only other thing that I'll add is I ordered the telescope, and then I think 2 days later, I contacted the vendor and I said, could you add a Vixen HR eyepiece to that
Oh,
order?
wow.
And he said, sure, no problem. So I thought planetary season's coming. I'm just going to bite the bullet here and get one of those HRs because they sound so amazing. And, a point that I'll make here, and this kind of goes back just to what we're talking about, even with that Bader Zeiss prism, is, you do pay, this stuff isn't cheap when you start to get into some of these, higher end premium pieces. And for me, because these rare nights are so fleeting, I want to make sure that when they happen, I'm ready, and I can get the best possible view that's available.
Yeah.
So, I'm the nice thing too about where we live in Saskatchewan here is we do get some pretty good nights, and they're not super rare here. They do
Yeah.
happen. And with planetary season coming up, I thought, let's see what this Vixen's all about. So I have the Vixen 2.0 millimeter HR coming as well with the telescope.
Yeah, so that will just give you 476 power on the 76 DCU. It's like you could make your own little cardboard box, right? That's about the magnification that they'll put on the on those old telescope department store telescopes that we used to see, right?
500 times.
Exactly, but I mean that maybe that telescope will do it. I mean, I hear like it should.
Yeah. I'm curious to see. It also could end up being an eyepiece that doesn't see a lot of action. I don't know. Well, time will tell.
Yeah, that is some hype. I own as you know, a Pentax 3.5. I own a Pentax 3.79 XP, and I own the Pentax XO 5.1. And my 5-inch, not recently because I've been using my other telescope, but in my 5-inch, all those eyepieces have seen an awful lot of planetary light. So, especially the 3.5.
Yeah, I contemplated the Vixen HR 3.4, but I have a Takahashi High Ortho 4.0 and also the 2.8.
Oh yeah.
So I kind of thought the 2 made a little more logical sense. And to your point, I've actually been using the 4.0 and the 2.8 tacks way more than I ever thought I would, and they're great. They really put up some fine views.
Yeah, and I mean one of the things that we've talked lots about this offline, and that's that you get the telescope cooled down. These small telescopes, they do cool down pretty quick, and you can run sort of those maximum powers or beyond. Like frequently, I mean, my most used planetary eyepiece in my 60 millimeter gives me about 130 magnification. So definitely breaking that little bit rule of thumb there. But yeah, I mean, and it's totally fine, and you can definitely see more because you're just increasing that image scale of the object quite a bit. So yeah. So I wanted to mention this was probably a month or so ago. You came and were a guest speaker at my astronomy class when it was still running, and you and I were talking. I was saying that I had wanted to buy a new diagonal, and a diagonal. These are the things that you stick in the look into part of the telescope. So the refractor has a lens in one end, and then that lens collects the light. The light forms a cone, comes down to a focus point, and then coming out of the focuser, you can either put an extender in and then put an eyepiece in and look through it sort of Galileo style, or you can put a diagonal in, and that will bend the light typically at about 90 degrees, which makes it more comfortable to look through. So you and I were chatting, and I wanted to get another Lumicon diagonal, and I've had a Lumicon diagonal for about 15 years now, and it's kind of getting a bit old. So,
Yeah.
and I know that Lumicon is one of those companies that I think it's kind of traded hands a couple times since, I've been buying their stuff anyway, and mostly they've been known for making really high quality nebula filters and some other kind of rare products, but they also make this diagonal. And the thing I like about this diagonal, there's a couple things, is it's very high quality, it's very lightweight, and it has this strange look to it. Instead of having sort of a square bottom, the bottom is running at about a 45-degree angle, and then the mirror is kind of just basically screwed to that. So the theory that I was sold on that is that, well, it looks kind of neat, and then apparently it's supposed to stay in alignment. And I mean, I've had that diagonal, as you know, up and down the roads, and we have some pretty bad roads here we've gone on trips on, and the thing's just perfect, for the better part of 20 years now. So but it's getting on, like, just getting a little bit worn in that, and I do travel with it, and I thought, well, if it ever gets lost or anything, it'd be heartbroken. And with all these telescopes, maybe it'd be good to buy another one or a backup one. And I went looking for it. I had some trouble kind of finding it, because at that point Lumicon was kind of in between owners, I think, and they weren't up on any website anywhere. So I mentioned this to you, and you pointed me to a telescope store that was going out of business.
Yeah.
So I looked, and it was a great deal. It was like, I think I ended up telling you I got like 60% off it or something.
Yeah. It was a fantastic price.
So, but it was a real bargain, let me tell you.
Yeah.
So it lands here, and of course, like we were saying offline a while back, we were both pretty busy after everybody kind of got sent home at their various jobs, and I do some support for first responders, so that sort of had its own thing, and so it kind of sat there for a couple of weeks, and then I opened it, and I was really excited. So at first I'm like, yeah, it looks good, and then turn it over, and I'm like, what is this? So it has the nose piece that fits into the telescope focuser as usual, and then it has that regular diagonal part with the that 45-degree, and the mirrors in there. But then instead of having, like, on my my old Lumicon diagonal has it just kind of has this very utilitarian barrel kind of just screwed onto it, which I never really gave much thought to. But like at night, like I say, it all looks the same in the dark, and works quite well. But this thing didn't have that. Instead, it has this sort of not quite square, not quite hexagonal piece that's about maybe 5 or 6 millimeters, or just about half a centimeter high, that is slightly larger than an eyepiece. So I was like, what is this thing? And I was kind of like, I got to figure this out. So once I had some time, I did some digging, and I went back and looked at their website, and I noticed that now they're selling a filter slide for a diagonal, right?
That's hilarious, because I was going to mention that to you.
Yeah, but they don't have the diagonal, right? So
Yeah.
so I wrote them this weekend. I said, yeah, I've got your diagonal, right, to this other part that you're selling. Why don't you just send it to me, right? Because you guys didn't send me what I bought, and then that's the part that I need.
Okay.
I don't have it. It took me kind of a while. Like, it's not very clear. Like, and this is kind of like a roll your own way of doing it, but I think it's supposed to come in a kit. And probably what happened is I found it very strange that they would buy this, because first of all, you've got to have a refractor, you've got to have some disposable income. So the original price on this thing is a lot of money. I think in the realm of maybe $500 or $600 American, and I think the on sale price for the whole kit was $500 Canadian. And so you've got to have the money to put into this. You've got to be somebody that has a good selection of refractors, a good selection of wide field eyepieces, and this is the critical part, a really good selection of 2-inch nebula filters, like, because it's a multiple filter slide, and this is not designed for astro imaging, which most people do, which I'm thinking is why they got it. I'm thinking they thought it was an astro imaging thing, because that's what the majority of people are into now, who would be buying really expensive filters. So you've got to already have kind of all this stuff lined up. So I'm thinking they've really got an audience of one for this. I'm really hoping they do the right thing and either give me a super deal on it, or just mail it to me, or something. But that would be pretty cool to have that.
Yeah, because one of the, like, we've talked to a lot about like the fiddle factor when you're at the eyepiece. You just want to put the eyepiece in and start observing. And if you have to take the eyepiece out to add Barlows or to add filters, it becomes kind of a pain in the butt, especially in the dark. And there's been many times, especially with filters, where I just grab it wrong. All of a sudden my thumb is on the glass, and I've left a thumbprint that I have to clean off properly, and it's frustrating. So there's filter wheels that you can buy quite easily, but the filter slide is a little different, and it's kind of neat that it's built in to the focuser. The only thing that I would kind of question a little bit is, like, are your filters going to get a little dirty when they're not inside the viewing portion?
Well, here's my perspective on it. My filters are already really damn dirty. Like, at this
just
point,
add to the filtering.
At this point, it's not really going to matter that much to my filters. So the first time, so when I bought my 5-inch Apochromat, I at the same time, I think maybe even before it arrived, because as you know, like, you ordered this scope, who knows when you're going to see it? Might be, if you got it in 5 weeks, I'd be impressed. But I think your plan is to hopefully get it by midsummer, so you can really start enjoying the planets as they come into the evening sky. But I ordered 2 or 3 2-inch filters. I ordered an O3, an H beta, and I may have already had a UHC. I think I already had the UHC. And so in my little group of astronomers, I think, and I think, like, with our little group of astronomers that we have now, I think I'm the only one with the 2-inch filters. I think you guys just have 1 1/4 or something like that. Do you have any 2-inch filters?
Yeah, I've bought a couple. I have
okay, so you have.
I think I just have a UHC. That might be it.
Yeah, and is it, but I remember when I first came out here, I was the only one around that had 2-inch filters, which is fine. Yeah. Kind of show them around or whatever. It's all good. So kind of once one person has one of these things, it's not really that necessary in your group for everybody to necessarily own them all. But in my group back in Ontario, when I lived there, I bought this O3, and nobody had ever even seen an O3 nebula filter. They had all been buying just 1 1/4. I don't know why, it just hadn't occurred to people. And so my friend just asked to borrow it. I can't remember, either I hadn't looked through it, or if I'd looked through it, I'd looked through it once at, like, the Orion Nebula or something. And then I handed it to him, and he went and looked at a bunch of objects. And when he took the eyepiece out, he unthreaded it, he dropped it on the ground and chipped the glass.
Oh no. Oh no.
Like, right away. But I'll tell you, like, he was somebody that, I loved, great person. And I was like, I'd like, don't worry, like, just don't even worry. I was just like, so chill. I felt like that was like a real turning point in my life, to kind of just feel like, this is just going to happen when you're doing this stuff, like, every once in a while, somebody's just going to drop your filter or an eyepiece or something. And, like, here we are now, like, all stuck kind of sitting around at home, and man, I'd give up an eyepiece filter for everything to go back to the way we were a few months ago anyway. So but where it chipped, it chipped on the edge, which I actually think is, and I couldn't notice it visually. And then it it hasn't impacted it, and I never replaced it or anything. So when you talk about, hey, if you put them in this slide and it's exposed to the nighttime air, I'm like, mine's already pretty dirty. It's got a hunk out of the glass. Like it's going to be okay, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So anyway, so we'll see what happens there. It's not ideal because I was really looking for just the standard one. But in the past I had thought about maybe getting one of these filter slide diagonals. But yeah. So anyway, so that's my story on the diagonal. So,
well, it's exciting. You have a new diagonal to try. I'm going to have a new telescope to try, and it's kind of fun to play with some new gear and just see what it does.
Yeah, sounds good.
Right on, Chris. Well, we're kind of at time where we usually wrap this thing up, so
yeah,
I think it's time.
All right. Well, it was great chatting with you, Shane, and we'll talk again next week.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Take care, man.